You're listening to another Ambitious Entrepreneur Network.com podcast, the voice for entrepreneurs and small business. Now, onto the show.
This is Women in Leadership Podcast, featuring success insights from women around the globe. Now, over to your host, Anne-Marie Cross.
And welcome to another episode of Women in Leadership Podcast, which is brought to you by the Influence Alliance, which is the membership program for coaches and consultants who want to build a profitable, scalable business while also launch and grow their podcast so that they can make a much bigger impact in the world with your message or their message. And I'm your host, Anne-Marie Cross. Now, my guest today says complacency is one of the deadliest things that can happen to a leader, because the minute you stop growing, the rest of the world is going to pass you by. And we certainly don't want that to happen, do we? So joining me on today's show is Karen Ann Bulluck. Karen is a Transcendent leadership specialist. She's also the founder of Transcendence, Living a Life of Meaning, a boutique executive coaching practice. Now, Karen partners with leaders to explore what matters, integrate the whole self, and flourish in new dimensions. She was the first woman promoted to executive vice president at AM Best Company, the insurance rating agency and information provider. And she specialized in bringing innovation to and change to struggling departments. So important. And I'm sure many companies around the world are struggling with that kind of thing. So luckily, we've got Karen joining us today. She has a Master of Science in Organizational Leadership. She is a certified professional coach, and she has immersed herself in the study of the world's wisdom traditions and leadership models. And she's also a best-selling author. At Transcendence, Karen partners with the leaders to rise above normal human limitations, to tap into the highest level of consciousness accessible by humans and gain clarity on what really matters so they can live a life of deeper meaning. We're going to talk about today with Karen around these particular areas: information about what a transcendent leadership is. What is it? And how can it benefit you personally and professionally? And how can it benefit organizations? We're going to talk about 3 tips on how do we become a transcendent leader, as well as inspiration to make changes in our lives, as well as our leadership, so that, guess what? We too can transcend limitations. So welcome to the show, Karen.
Thank you, Anne-Marie. I'm happy to be here today.
So transcendent leadership, how would you define that?
Well, I like to tie it back to Maslow's final hierarchy of needs. You know, that triangle that we learned probably back in school about how our needs are met, from the very basic needs of survival up until the ones we usually learned was self-realization. But a few people know that he added in another layer, a 6th one, at the end of his life, called transcendence or self-transcendence. And he talked about accessing that higher level of consciousness that's available to humans, to take things to a higher level of functioning in the world. And so to me, transcendence is that. It is overcoming what is in the world and allowing us to tap into the greater universe, if you want to call it that, in order to gain clarity and wisdom.
I love that, how you've explained that, because I know sometimes as coaches we can use specific words, and people may not understand the meaning around that, but I'm sure we've certainly heard of Maslow's hierarchy and theory. And I know particularly when we're having conversations now with leaders around the world, whether they're running their own business or whether they are working for a corporation, there's been so much change going on, so much uncertainty, that the things that may not have been apparent are now coming to the surface, and we're looking at things in a different way, isn't it? And so now more than ever, it's so important to be able to gain self-awareness around some of the things that previously may have been there, but not necessarily showing themselves. And so awareness, I think, around that, clarity around where are we struggling is so important, because how can we change something? How can we move forward to learn and grow if we don't identify some of those areas? So glad that you are here with us today. So let's talk about transcendent leadership. We talked about what transcendent is, but leadership when it comes to self, I would imagine as well, but also team. What does that look like? Let's paint a picture of what's possible once we have that level of transcendent leadership.
Well, it really is tapping into that higher level of consciousness. And what that allows you to do, Anne Marie, is get a lot more clarity, get a lot more understanding of yourself and others, that awareness. When you are tapped in and you are connected, you have a level of vision, I want to call it, that you can see. You can see not only what's going on in yourself, but you can sense more easily what's going on in other people and be able to connect with them. So it's not only connecting to that consciousness, but it's really connecting to other people. And when we're connected to other people, when we're aware of what's going on around us and aware of what's going on for other people, that certainly makes us better leaders, because we can know how to respond to people. We know how to connect and interact with them better.
Yeah, so true. Because if you think about various people who we are working with, so whether you're a leader of a small team in your own business or you're a leader of other people in the organization, and often your team needs to associate with other people's teams and so forth, a lot of different styles of personalities and communication styles. And when we layer on top of that a whole lot of personal issues, which many of your team have needed to deal with, as well as yourself, quite often we can be talking at people and we're talking over what's actually going on. But how about let's be a little bit more mindful and gaining a bit of an awareness so that we cannot speak at people, but rather with, and come to a win-win solution. Because that's often what happens, isn't it? When you have conflict in a team, you may be trying to achieve the same goals. Individuals, we get to the goal, obviously, but in a different style. And if we don't gain appreciation of that with our team members, it can seem like a huge struggle, can't it, Karen?
Oh, absolutely. And we so often talk at people. That's a great way of putting it. And that's where really awareness comes in, and which is one of the pillars of transcendent leadership for me is awareness of our limiting beliefs, awareness of those blind spots that we have in ourselves, right? Because it has to start with ourselves. We have to be able to see what we're thinking, what's stopping us from being transcendent, stopping us from reaching our full potential, before we can really bring that out in other people. And so often that awareness, we want to be emotionally aware of ourselves, and we want to be emotionally aware of other people. And that's important, but it goes deeper than that. It's really being aware of what you believe. What are you telling yourself in your head? What are the stories you're telling yourself? And when you understand that, and then can start to reprogram those stories and get that stuff out of your own way, well, then it's much easier to connect with people and see what's getting in their way, right? Because if you can't see what's getting in your own way, it's really hard to see what is getting in someone else's way.
Yeah. The conversations I think that we have in our own head, as you said, we can generalize and we can overcomplicate things, and we can put words and expressions that we assume people are thinking about us and saying about us, when in actual fact it's not. I mean, if we use an example, I think sometimes examples can really paint a picture of how significantly impactful, and sometimes not in a good way. Because you can imagine someone may be sitting across from you on the table in the office, and they're looking at you, and the expression that they have in their face is less than friendly, but they may be sitting thinking, did I turn the oven off, or did I something quite. But that's really what you're saying, isn't it? Be mindful and aware of what we are assuming. I'll share something with you, and it was in one of the interviews that I did many years ago, and an organization, what they did was they got the team around the table and said, look, we're only as what makes you as comfortable as what you want to share. what would be one significant event that you believed has shaped who you are today? And as they went around the table, the gasps could be heard. There were even a few tears from team members as they heard the stories and the journeys that some of these young men, and now obviously adults, that was impacting them, and similar for women. They gained such an awareness and had such an appreciation of the other team members. And then they realized those people who are very short and sharp wasn't because they were angry and whatever, again, labeling people, but it was because this was a young boy who saw his parents get killed. And then he immediately had to become caretaker for his younger brothers. And so, there are things. And so that's what you're saying, isn't it? When we have an awareness, we have an appreciation of others as well. Yes?
Absolutely. I mean, we don't know what's gone on in people's lives. We don't know what's going on in people's lives today. I mean, to your point, it's so easy to sit at a conference table and see someone who looks upset and think, okay, make it about me, right? What did I say or do to make this person upset? When a lot of times it has, to your point, it may not have nothing to do with it. Maybe their child's home sick. Maybe, their husband is late coming home from a business trip. I mean, there could be a million just day-to-day reasons why people are upset, much less the kind of trauma that you're talking about.
Yeah. And when we're talking about transcendent leadership, and as a leader providing or creating an environment and helping others to contribute to that environment, I would imagine that when people feel safe, when they feel validated, when they feel respected, and we're going to talk about 3 tips on what we can do to become more of this transcendent leader. But when we create an environment like that, people will naturally step in and contribute, isn't it? And become more effective and efficient and productive when we deal and allow the other stuff that perhaps previously, don't bring your emotions to work. Well, how can you hang on, let me just take that out of my brain and go to, we can't do that. And so we need to have an environment that allows the full person, the whole person to come to the workplace. What would you say to that?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that's one of the things that we've all done. I mean, it's not only to keep your emotions out of work, right? Don't bring your problems to the office, leave them at home. How do people do that? I mean, even if you're telling somebody to do that, are you doing that yourself? Probably not, because we're humans. We're all these things happen, and it's hard to tune everything out. But we've also told people, don't bring your spirituality to work. Don't bring any of that to work either, because, okay, we might cross some lines here. We might, make people uncomfortable, but our spirituality is part of who we are too, whatever that looks like. And again, if we're leaving that at home, to me, our spirituality, our connection, which I know I'll keep talking about a lot, but it's so important, that connection to whatever we believe in, whether it's, your higher self or the universe or universal consciousness, or however we relate to it. That's an important part of our creativity. It's really how we get ideas. It's how we expand. And if we're telling people, no, leave that at home too, well, okay, then what are they bringing to work? Their brains. Well, our brains are only a small fraction of who we are. And our brains process things, but they're not who we are. And it's so important to allow people to express themselves and be themselves. And I mean, one of the things that I believe in so strongly is the freedom of expression. And so often that expression is suppressed in workplaces because we have to conform to whatever is going on in that workplace. And of course, I'm not talking about freedom of expression as far as being rude to people or, that kind of thing, but being able to express our whole selves in a constructive, joyful way in the office. Think of how much energy that would bring. Think how much people would feel so much more. Yes, I can contribute. Yes, I want to do things. I can be myself and and that's okay, and it's accepted and respected to use your word. That's so important to people.
Yeah. I mean, when you're sharing that, I think it's so important, because if you think about bringing your whole self and expression of you to the workplace, which I think is so important, you don't want people to have a mask or to, not to do that, because eventually that is going to impact them and the team, and ultimately the results in the company as well. But one of the things, as coaches, we realize the things that we do not deal with and gloss over are going to come back and bite us in the, what, down the track. One of the things, and I'm not going to open this can of worms, but I am going to mention it, because you see here in society, especially here in Australia, I'm not sure what it's like over where you are in the US, Karen, but we're seeing a lot of people being told, well, you can't say that anymore because it offends this person or these people. You can't do that anymore. They're actually wanting us to stop expressing who we are as men and women, like our identities, because of another group. How about we say, well, rather than that, let's help those people who are a little bit to be able to support and get comfortable with expressing who they are alongside us. So rather than suppress, I mean, that's a whole other conversation that we can go won't go into today, but it's true, isn't it? Rather than blocking and stopping people from expressing, how about we create an environment where we can talk about it in a respectful way? We don't even need to agree with them, but let's have the conversation. I can still appreciate you as an individual, and the contribution and your thoughts and your ideas. There may be some things that I don't necessarily agree with, but hey, we can still have coffee. We can still sit across the boardroom table. And I think creating that kind of environment is going to appreciate everybody, isn't it?
Absolutely. Well, we have to. And it goes back to the quote that you quoted from me at the beginning of the podcast, is it lends itself to complacency, right? When we get stuck in a mindset and then we can't say certain things because it might offend someone else, or it might, upset them, it creates a complacency in really the whole society and the environment, that we're only going to think and talk in one specific way. And when we do that, we stop growing. And not only do we stop growing as individuals, but we stop growing as a community as well. And we're not always going to agree. And sometimes there are things that people will say to each other that are going to upset each other. But that doesn't mean we stop talking. It means we say, okay, I upset you. How can we talk about this in a way maybe that won't upset you? Or how can I make you more comfortable? Can I understand what's upsetting you? But if we just say, oh, I'm upset, I can't talk about, well, what's upsetting you? Let's talk about that.
Let's unpack that. Let's heal what's ever going on there.
Right. Let's heal it.
It doesn't matter, because I think that for me, and I would say as you as a coach and other coaches, the minute people start to change and what's underlying that, what's causing that, that's the issue that we need to deal with. If someone is getting, I said this the other day to, I was being coached in one of my coaching, and they were and I said, just tell me, I will not be offended, because there's learning opportunities. And I had a massive aha. It was one of those, forehead slapping moments. If we're going around going, well, you can't say that because that offends me. Well, you need to look at yourself and say, what's going on there that's actually offending and triggering you? What is that trigger? And I think that's what you're talking about here. If we're going around with triggers and going, hang on, I can't put that hat on because that might offend that person and that person, we need to dig deeper, because if we create an environment like that, that is the opposite of transcendent leadership, isn't it? It's the absolute opposite.
It is the absolute opposite, because transcendent leadership, as I talked about before, that awareness piece of it, it's being aware of what's triggering you, right? It's understanding what's triggering me, what's going on inside me, not what's going on out there, right? Because there's millions of things that are going to go out there that are going to upset you. But if you understand what's going on inside for you, and to your point, that's where a great coach is so helpful to mirror you and help you understand what's really going inside of you, then you have the opportunity to grow. You have the opportunity to change. You have the opportunity to expand your viewpoint. Maybe you won't change your mind, your opinion, but if you can get past that trigger piece of it, you're going to be able to listen to people and respect them more if you can get past what's triggering you. And listening is such a key part of being a transcendent leader, of being a great leader. Because if we don't listen, if we can't listen, we can't learn, we can't grow, and we're never going to understand other people.
Oh, absolutely. And who wants to not be able to grow? We're always learning and developing, aren't we? So you started to hint. I mean, is listening one of the 3 tips in becoming a transcendent leader? Is that one of the tips? Let's dive into what those 3 are.
Well, it's related. I think the awareness is the 3 tips. I mean, or is one of the 3 tips, is really developing that deep awareness of your beliefs, of your limiting beliefs, of the cultural conditioning, right? You're talking about the cultural conditioning that's shutting us down now. But I mean, there's cultural conditioning in all ways that we don't make us think things we're not aware of. So awareness of both the limiting beliefs and the cultural conditioning is certainly one of them. Connection is the biggest one, though. I mean, it's really that daily practice of connection, whatever that looks like to you. I mean, a lot of people meditate every day, but it doesn't have to be meditation, because I know that scares people. I can't sit still for that long. It doesn't have to be. I mean, for me, one of the greatest ways to connect is actually to take a walk, to be outside and just take a walk, and just, the rhythm of the walking, and that, whether it's, or running, and, my husband uses running for his connection, journaling. There's millions of ways to connect, but it is taking that time every day to connect with the higher power, with your higher self, with that higher level of consciousness. Because if we don't connect every day, the rest of it kind of falls apart. So connection really, to me, is the cornerstone of it, and awareness. And awareness is another key to being a transcendent leader. And the third thing is really knowing what's important. I mean, is that clarity about your values. It's knowing what's important to you, so that you can then, and this is another big aspect of it, related to listening, but setting boundaries, right? If you know what's important, you can set boundaries around things. And that's another big piece to me of being a transcendent leader, really learning how to set boundaries, setting boundaries so that you can make time for connection, setting boundaries so that you're focusing on what's important, setting boundaries so that you've got healthy relationships with people.
Yeah.
I mean, those things are so important. And that is a huge key to being a transcendent leader.
Yeah, that is so important. I mean, just the other day, boundaries are so important, setting them, but then also ensuring that they are, you hold those boundaries. And it can be difficult, can't it? And in actual fact, I'm going to have some conversations with someone, because I realize that some of the things that are happening is actually not aligned with the values and my boundaries. And if I continue to do that, I'm just going to get worn out. And that's really what aspect of what you're talking about, being at that transcendent leader, is being so tapped into knowing who you are. For me, my connection is, I mean, I'm a Christian, so I love the Lord. So my time is meditating on the word. But I have to say something, I was smiling on the inside, because I'm one of those people that are always on the go. My mind is always active. And so when someone said to me, years ago, talked about meditation, I thought, there is no way. The voices inside of my head to keep them quiet. But it's been a process. And so sitting still, and then recognizing, and then when you're talking about that time that you get when you recognize, is this really something going on for me, or is that just, we begin to be able to recognize, is that something that I need to deal with? Yes, it is. A boundary is being, pushed. What do I need to do? I need to have a good conversation about that. So all of these things are important, aren't they? But it's consistently to do that. And then I think as we begin to do that, we can role model that for our team, can't we?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
we can. And to your point, it is a process. It's something that you do every day, and it gets deeper, deeper and in different directions every day. To your point, sometimes when I'm meditating, or I like to read, whether it's scripture or other spiritual things, I go back and forth. I have lots of sources.
Me too.
I've studied.
The highlighter and all of that is, yeah.
But sometimes, you open that book in the morning, one of the things I do is I'll open the book in the morning, whatever it is that I'm using as my spiritual tool, and okay, what is it that I need to know? And sometimes the stuff that pops off that page, it's just like, oh no.
Yeah. But it's
I,
true, isn't it?
I didn't want to see that today, but it's part of how we learn. It's part of being open. It's being open to that awareness, right? The connection awareness, and allowing ourselves to be shown the things that we need to work on, or the things that we need to be more diligent about as far as boundaries are.
Yeah. And we know as coaches, isn't it? There often is the one or two key things, and it's different for everybody, that is going to be something that we really need to spend time on healing. There's forgiveness process around that, so that we're not emotionally connected to that. And we don't want to be like that, so that a conversation or a comment that one of our team members, or maybe someone in your team, needs that support. So who better than to have a conversation and to create an environment that will allow them to work through that. So that when things are said, they don't instantly go back to whatever it is that may have them respond and react in a way that they normally wouldn't. And I think having an awareness of that as leaders, that this is possible in and of itself, I think is going to be a huge awareness, because otherwise you get a lot of people in there with lots of different, stresses and the way that they react and respond to change. Some of us love it. We thrive on change. And but there's some people in our team that don't, and we have to help them, I think, navigate that through. But awareness is so important. Connection, definitely, as well. Let's talk about inspiration to make changes. If people have been listening today and they're saying, Karen, I think there's a little way to go for me to become at that level of that awareness of that transcendent leadership, what are some things that you can share with them, maybe to get the ball started?
Well, I think the first thing is just to take some time every day and set aside, even if it's only 5 minutes, to set aside some time every day to give yourself a chance to slow down and unplug, because it's so hard to have that awareness. You talked earlier about creating, people feeling safe. And creating a safe space for me is so important as a leader, because I want to do that for the people around me. I mean, not just as a leader, but as a human being, I want to try to create safe space for people. But that starts by creating safe space for myself.
Yes.
Because I can't do it. I can't create that safe space for someone else unless I feel like I'm coming from a safe space, right?
So true.
So one of the biggest things you can do is create that safe space for yourself. Take the time out, unplug, care for yourself first. Really, I think that's one of the biggest places that people can start. And then as you create that safe space, as you create that quiet space, whatever that looks like for you, then you start to get the awareness, and you start to become aware of the things that are triggering you, the things that you need to tap into. And that's the starting point for change, because that's when you start to really see, okay, this is interesting. I hadn't thought about that incident that happened yesterday, but now that I've quieted it down, it popped up and I was really upset about it. Okay, why was I really upset about it? What's going on for me? And how can I get rid of the trigger myself, right? So that then I can go back and maybe help that other person, or have a conversation with them about boundaries or values or whatever you need to. But that quiet time is it's so important.
Totally agreed. As you were saying that, Karen, I'd imagine that some people, for them, just having an awareness of, or giving yourself permission to document and clarify, what is a safe space for me? What needs to be there? For some people, they wouldn't even know. For some people like you, I love nature too. I mean, we can't so often get out now, but we love the YouTube videos, and there are beautiful places in the world. And my husband and I, he's also a bit of an adventurer, we will just sit, the mountains with snow and the rivers and the waterfalls, and, because it really just kind of soothes the soul, so to speak. For some people, they don't even realize that. So as you said, take some time to to identify what that is and then make a plan. Just start, isn't it? Start to make a plan to put that in your diary that that's what you're going to do. And similarly, and you model that so well, those questions, you can have that conversation with a team member. You know, what is a safe space for you? What needs to be there? How do you feel validated? What can we do to be able to support you? And I think by having that conversation, you can then open, you know, the door to recognizing what's important. Because so often as leaders, we can assume that our team likes this or that. Why not ask them? They're their biggest fans. They'll be able to share with us what it is that we can do to help them be more safe, or whatever language that, you know, resonates with them, that they can show up and be, you know, validated and respected within the workplace. Just start, isn't it? When
It
you
is a start. It reminds me, and I'm sure your listeners can relate to this. It reminds me of a conversation I had a few weeks ago with a group of women, and we were talking about things amongst ourselves that we did to take a break, to tap into our creativity, to get into that flow state that you get in when you're connected. And a few of the women in the group, as we were talking through it, said, you can do that? Like, up and take a walk in the middle of the day? Like, you shouldn't, why? I thought you had to keep working all day. and we were, you know, it was really great, because they kind of had the breakthrough that, well, maybe just working straight through from, you know, whatever, 6 o'clock in the morning to 6 o'clock at night, or however long they were working, you know, taking that time a little bit to step away, to reconnect, you know, even if it's just, you know, getting up and taking a walk around the block, right, for 5 minutes, can just change your whole perspective on things. So it's, to your point, giving yourself permission to stop for a minute and say, okay, I don't have to be going, because that's what we think we have to do all the time. Go. But we're actually a lot more effective if we can stop. I know when I was working, it was very important for me to take a lunch break, you know, to try not to work. I mean, I did some days, but I tried not to work through my lunch hour, to at least take some time to get out of the office, to read something that was unrelated to work, to do something to disconnect from work for at least, you know, 10 or 15 minutes during the day. And I felt like I was so much more productive in the afternoon, so much more aware if I did that versus just pounding. So it's really important to give yourself permission to take that time to do it.
Yeah, it's so true. I think, you know, people who often, we wear a badge of honor, don't we, when we're so busy, but you can, if you take a 20-minute break, and there's even been studies done that when you do take a break and a disconnection of that, or you come back, you're far more efficient, far more effective, far more productive because of that. And someone that I know quite well, running her own business, she would often message me and say, just letting you know that I'm taking a nap. She said, you don't have to respond, but I just need to share it with someone because I'm actually feeling a bit guilty. So I would mix her back, said, you take that nap, have a double nap, actually, because I knew that this person was an action taker. So the energy that she inputted in the 20 minutes, half an hour, or whatever to would be worth double that of perhaps someone else. And when you're continuing to operate at that level, you have to take a break, don't you, to replenish. And let's hope that one of the significant changes in all workplaces around the world, whether it be your own business or in corporate, recognize the values of rest and of sitting there and of breaks and of looking after yourself. And in actual fact, I think a lot more individuals now recognize the value of that, and they're putting into place boundaries.
Yeah.
And saying, if that company doesn't respect my boundaries of rest, and starting at a specific time and finishing at a specific time, because, you know, family and external activities and rest is important, then that's not a company that I want to be part of. So
yeah, and the pandemic did that in a big way. I mean, because I think the pandemic really highlighted how those boundaries had gotten blurred. I mean, they were blurred before the pandemic started, let's face it, you know, with our tablets and our smartphones and all of that. I mean, those boundaries were blurred way before the pandemic started. The pandemic really brought it home how
Yes.
those boundaries had been blurred, because it took away the physical boundary of leaving and coming home. And all of a sudden it just became so apparent to everybody, oh, wow, I'm doing a lot more juggling and work and not having these boundaries than I realized. And I think it did help people recognize that. And I think that's one of the reasons that this is such a great time to talk about transcendent leadership, to talk about bringing some of these really important concepts, because the pandemic has opened the door to how badly we need this.
Oh, so
It's
true.
not something that we can ignore anymore. I
We
mean,
can't ignore it. We can't ignore it. I often of a evening, I'll just leave my phone in my office. Not all the time, but but yesterday my daughter rang and said, "Oh, Mum's not answering her phone," and it's just like, no, I just do not want to be distracted by that. I'm sitting down. I ended up doing some baking, which is just highly unlike me at all. But it is findings. I actually realized that I quite enjoy it, and so it's those things. Remind yourself, what do you enjoy? Maybe there are some hobbies and things. I also took up watercolor, not realizing that I actually enjoy that too. But it is actually the sitting and just the relaxation and doing something completely different with your whole being, if you will. And those are the kind of things that we need to put back into our lives purposefully, intentionally, because then when we are with our team and in our business and in our work, it means that we're able to bring our full self to that activity. And I have loved today's conversation, Karen. And of course, we have just scratched the surface. I'm sure there are so many more things that you could share with us. But for people who have listened and who have been thinking, you know what Karen has said that really has highlighted some areas that we really need to focus on, what's the best way for them to be able to connect with you?
Well, LinkedIn is probably the easiest way to connect with me. So Karen Ann Bulluck at LinkedIn. I'm also on Facebook as Karen Ann Bulluck, and I have a website, which is livingalifeofmeaning.com. So
Fantastic. Terrific. Well, thank you so much once again for coming on the show. Connect with Karen across the platforms, but please go and check her out on her website as well. But thanks once again, Karen, for coming on the show.
Well, thank you, Anne-Marie. I have had a great time talking to you too. And you're right, we've only scratched the surface, but it's been fun. And I hope we can continue the conversation sometime.
Absolutely.
This podcast is brought to you by theinfluencealliance.com. Want to influence real change with your message by becoming known as a trusted authority in your industry while building a sustainable and scalable business you love? Find out how by accessing our free podcast series at www.theinfluencealliance.com/podcast series. That's theinfluencealliance.com/podcast series.